As the war in Ukraine grinds on and economic tensions between the US and China continue to simmer, the old assumptions about globalization and the efficacy of Western sanctions are being called into question. Are the US and Europe still the dominant force in the global economy, able to bend other nations to their will through punitive economic measures? Or is a new, more multipolar world emerging where the influence of the West is waning and the flow of commerce simply reroutes around barriers? These were the weighty issues on the mind of Hamad Bouamim, the chairman of Dubai's main trading hub, when I sat down with him recently in his office overlooking the bustling port of Jebel Ali. Bouamim, who also serves as president of the Dubai Chamber of Commerce, is not one to mince words. Sanctions slow the economy, never stop it, he told me flatly. Trade continues flowing, it just flows in a different way. It was a startling admission from a man whose city has prospered mightily from the free flow of global commerce. But as Bouamim sees it, the days when the West could dictate terms to the rest of the world are over. In today's more fragmented and interdependent global economy, attempts to isolate or punish disfavored nations are increasingly ineffective, he argues. The sanctions imposed on Russia over its invasion of Ukraine are a case in point. The fact that the economy is not purely controlled by one side of the world makes these sanctions less effective, Bouamim said. If we just take the Ukraine conflict, sanctions are effective when you look west, but they are not really effective beyond that. He has a point. While the US and European sanctions have undoubtedly inflicted economic pain on Russia, cutting it off from much of the global financial system and restricting its access to advanced technology, the measures have done little to change the Kremlin's behavior or halt its military campaign. If anything, the conflict seems to be hardening into a protracted stalemate, with neither side able to deliver a decisive blow. Meanwhile, oil and other key commodities keep flowing out of Russia, finding ready buyers in energy-hungry nations like China and India that have declined to join the Western sanctions regime. Even some European countries, while publicly backing the sanctions, have quietly continued to import Russian gas through backdoor channels. The UAE, for its part, has seen an influx of Russian businesses and expatriates looking to avoid the sanctions, with oil traders relocating from Geneva to Dubai. We don't see them as a great tool to make any impact, Bouamim said of the sanctions. They are just making trade more complex and impacting the whole world. To be sure, the restrictions have made it more difficult and costly for Russia to access some critical goods and technologies. According to defense analysts, the sanctions have hindered Russia's ability to produce advanced weapons and sustain its earlier rate of fire in Ukraine. The Finnish think tank Krea estimates that sanctions on Russian oil exports cost the Kremlin around €34 billion, $37 billion, last year, mainly by forcing down the price of Russian crude. But Bouamim and other observers say the broader impact has been muted, and the costs have largely been borne by Western consumers in the form of higher energy prices. Despite the sanctions, the IMF projects the Russian economy will actually grow this year, albeit at a modest 1% rate. That's a far cry from the economic collapse many Western leaders predicted when the measures were first imposed. So what are we to make of this? Are economic sanctions becoming obsolete in an age of diffuse global power and competing spheres of influence? The answer, I would argue, is not quite so simple. It's true that the world is becoming more multipolar, with rising powers like China and India commanding an ever greater share of global GDP. U.S. economic primacy is no longer uncontested, and Washington's ability to dictate terms to the rest of the world is not what it once was. The growing use of alternative currencies and payment systems is eroding the dominance of the US dollar. Initiatives like China's Belt and Road are redrawing trade routes and supply chains, connecting markets in new ways. In this environment, Bouamim is correct that Western sanctions packs less of a punch than it used to. Countries have more options now for circumventing US restrictions and conducting business through alternative channels. The emergence of cryptocurrencies and other decentralized financial networks makes it easier to move money under the radar of regulators. Opportunistic states can step in as middlemen to keep commerce flowing in the face of geopolitical headwinds. Yet it would be premature to declare sanctions obsolete. For all the changes afoot, the US and its allies still wield enormous financial power as the home of the world's deepest capital markets and its most widely used currency. Violators of US sanctions still face serious consequences, from asset freezes to exclusion from the dollar-based financial system. Secondary sanctions allow Washington to put pressure on foreign companies and governments not to do business with sanctioned entities. Unilateral measures can be amplified through multilateral bodies like the UN Security Council. What's more, sanctions are not always primarily about inflicting immediate economic pain. They are a means of expressing moral opprobrium, rallying allies, and shaping long-term strategic incentives. Even if the sanctions on Russia have not altered the Kremlin's short-term calculus, their psychological and political effects should not be discounted. The stigma and pariah status they confer could, over time, sap Russian power and influence. Ultimately, sanctions are a tool, one that is not always surgical or instantly effective, but a tool nonetheless. And in the face of armed aggression or grave human rights abuses, the West is right to use every tool at its disposal, even if the results are uneven. So where does this leave us? In a world that I believe will be defined by intensifying economic balkanization and great power competition. As Boimim rightly notes, the tensions between the US and China are no longer a bilateral issue. They are a systemic risk that raises profound challenges for businesses and policymakers everywhere. Countries and companies will find it increasingly difficult to avoid taking sides or getting caught in the crossfire. For the UAE and other nations aiming to steer a middle course between rival powers, the road ahead will only get rockier. The US is likely to keep pressing its partners to align themselves more closely with Western restrictions on Russia and China. Beijing, for its part, is already punishing countries like Lithuania and Australia that have run afoul of its strategic interests. Navigating these shoals while preserving domestic autonomy will require deft diplomacy and hedging. The hard truth is there may be no escaping a world of more fractured supply chains and regional trading blocs. Governments everywhere are pursuing industrial policies aimed at reducing external dependencies in critical sectors. Businesses are rethinking far-flung operations in an age of heightened geopolitical risk. Economic integration is giving way to resiliency and self-sufficiency as organizing principles. But this more fragmented landscape is not without its silver linings. The diversification of supply chains could spur development in the global south as companies seek to reduce their exposure to US-China tensions. The rise of friendshoring and regional trade pacts may deepen integration among geopolitically aligned states. And Boimim is right to point to the transformative potential of artificial intelligence and other technologies in managing the complexity. The path forward, in my view, is not to abandon economic statecraft, but to adapt it to new realities. Sanctions should be used judiciously and in concert with allies where possible to maximize their impact. They should be coupled with incentives and off-ramps to shape long-term behavior. And they should exist alongside efforts to strengthen the rules-based trading system and ensure its benefits are more evenly shared. Handled wisely, economic interdependence can still be a source of stability and prosperity in a turbulent world. But the assumptions of the past will not carry us through the challenges ahead. As Boimim put it succinctly, that tension between the US and China is no longer a US-China problem. This is a challenge for businesses throughout the world. In Dubai and beyond, the scramble to adapt is already underway. How it unfolds will shape the contours of the 21st century global economy, and much else besides. We are in uncharted waters, and the currents are swift, but with pragmatism, foresight, and no small amount of courage, I believe we can navigate them together. The alternative is unthinkable. At the close of our conversation, I asked Boimim what kept him up at night. He paused for a moment before responding, the possibility of a major confrontation between the great powers. A breakdown in global trade that leads to economic suffering and political instability. The danger that in pursuing our narrow interests, we lose sight of our common humanity and the urgent challenges we face as a species, from climate change to poverty to disease. They are sobering thoughts, and ones that should give us all pause. In a world of tectonic geopolitical shifts and technological disruption, it is easy to succumb to a sense of fatalism or despair. But as I left Boimim's office and stepped out into the shimmering heat of a Dubai afternoon, I was reminded of the resilience and ingenuity of the human spirit. For all the obstacles ahead, we have overcome greater challenges before. The story of human progress is one of adapting to change, of finding new ways to connect and cooperate across borders and boundaries. From the ancient Silk Road to the modern internet, we have always been a species on the move, driven by a restless curiosity and a boundless capacity for innovation. And therein, perhaps, lies the key to navigating the turbulent waters ahead. Not in retreating behind walls or retreating into narrow nationalism, but in doubling down on the values and institutions that have underpinned global stability and prosperity for generations. In recommitting ourselves to the rule of law, to human rights and human dignity, to the belief that we are stronger together than we are apart. It will not be easy. The forces of division and polarization are strong, and the temptation to go it alone will be great. But as Boimim City knows better than most, there is power in openness, in serving as a crossroads and a meeting place for cultures and ideas. In a world of deepening fault lines, places like Dubai can be a bridge, not just for commerce, but for understanding and cooperation. That, in the end, may be the true test of leadership in the 21st century. Not in imposing ones will through force or fiat, but in forging partnerships and coalitions that can harness our collective strengths while respecting our diversity. In recognizing that the challenges we face, from economic disruption to environmental degradation to the specter of conflict, are fundamentally global in nature and require global solutions. As I boarded my flight back home, my thoughts returned to a quote from the great Arab poet Khalil Gibran that Boimim had shared with me: "Progress lies not in enhancing what is, but in advancing toward what will be." Words to live by in a world where the only constant is change. For businesses and policymakers alike, the road ahead is uncertain. The temptation to turn inward, to retreat into the false comfort of protectionism and isolationism, will be strong. But if history has taught us anything, it is that such strategies are ultimately self-defeating. In an interconnected world, there can be no lasting security or prosperity without broad-based cooperation and mutual understanding. The alternative is a world of deepening mistrust and recrimination, of rising tensions and lost opportunities. A world where the vast potential of global trade and innovation is left unrealized, and where the pressing challenges of our time go unaddressed. That is not a future any of us can afford. So let us take inspiration from the dynamism and determination of places like Dubai, from their faith in the power of connection and exchange, and their willingness to adapt to new realities. Let us recommit ourselves to the hard work of building bridges, forging consensus, and crafting a global architecture that works for everyone. For in the end, we are all in this together, all of us passengers on this fragile planet, hurtling through space and time. And in a world of complex interdependence, the fates of nations and peoples are inextricably linked. The choices we make today, as businesses and governments and individuals, will echo down the generations. Let them be choices we can be proud of. Choices that reflect our highest ideals and aspirations, not our darkest fears and impulses. Choices that summon us to a larger, more generous vision of human possibility. That, in the end, is the great challenge and opportunity of our time. To build a world that is not just more prosperous, but more just and humane. A world where the benefits of progress are shared by all, and where the bonds of our common humanity are stronger than the forces that would divide us. It is a tall order, to be sure. But as I look out at the gleaming skyscrapers of Dubai, rising improbably from the desert sands, I am reminded that impossible things happen every day. That with vision and commitment and hard work, we can bend the arc of history toward a better tomorrow. The journey will not be easy, and the destination is far from certain. But as the old Arabic proverb puts it, the best way to predict the future is to create it. So let us roll up our sleeves and get to work, guided by the compass of our values and the knowledge that we are all in this together. For in a world of change and disruption, one thing remains constant: the power of human ingenuity and the resilience of the human spirit. And that, in the end, may be our greatest asset as we navigate the uncharted waters ahead. As Boimim bid me farewell with a firm handshake and a warm smile, I couldn't help but feel a sense of hope amid the uncertainty. For all the challenges we face, there are also tremendous opportunities to build new partnerships, to forge new solutions, to create a world that is more just, more sustainable, and more inclusive. The road ahead will be long and winding, and there will be setbacks and detours along the way. But with wisdom and courage and a commitment to our shared humanity, I believe we can navigate it together. And in doing so, we can build a future worthy of our highest aspirations, a future of greater prosperity, security, and understanding for all. That is the promise and the challenge of our time. And it is one we must not shrink from, but embrace with all the determination and ingenuity at our command. For in the end, the arc of history is long, but it bends toward justice, if we have the courage to bend it. So let us summon that courage, and let us get to work. The future is ours to shape, and the time to start is now.